Okay.
Guys, thank you very much for joining. I didn't do all the background investigation actually for the fancy introductions, so I will let you do it yourself. Yeah, I'm being lazy, so please.
So I've been involved in building and delivering quality software for over 30 years. I started working at Apple in 1986 and have been doing this stuff since then. Most recently, I was at Yahoo. I am now living in Singapore and working in Singapore as kind of a CTO for hire for various startups there. My name is Jordan Dea-Mattson, and I'm the chief architect at DevOps PM.
Great. Hi, my name is Jos Bouwmans. I work for a little company called Crux just down the road. In a past life, I used to run the server team at Canonical. So if you run Ubuntu Linux, either you're welcome or I'm sorry, depending on what your experience has been. I hope you're welcome. We were pretty proud of it. And in days before that, I used to work at Ripe NCC. You know them as herein over here, which run a lot of the internet infrastructure. So I've been working in environments where operators ruled for a long time. I have a development background. I used to run development teams. And I got very, very frustrated the way operators did their job, like either put up or shut up. So I became one of those guys. And hopefully I have a few lessons learned that I can share.
Good for you.
There. Thanks, man.
My name is Leonard Igonik. I'm currently with CA Technologies working on some security offerings in a SaaS space. Prior to that was with Taleo and Oracle, ran engineering and ops briefly there. And as part of my career at CA, I also been responsible for APM software engineering team. So I've studied the market a bit as a vendor and have that perspective. It was interesting to come from a customer perspective to the vendor perspective. I take pride of only working on on-premise software for about a couple of years of my career. Everything else was software running in the internet. So it was interesting to see how we evolved from the day of the terminal to the way of AWS and one-click button, 1,000 servers spinning up on demand.
Yep. And then straight back again.
Straight back to the show.
Hello, my name is Aniket Kulkarni. I'm Director for Cloud Engineering Services at Box. We are a company that's going hyperscale, growing very quickly. And in addition to their cloud engineering efforts, I also manage their site reliability teams. Prior to this, I was running operations for QuickBooks Online at Intuit. And prior to that, I was at Oracle running PeopleSoft operations.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm extremely honored to be your moderator on such an impressive panel. So before we actually talk about DevOps and how you do DevOps, I have the question that I briefly mentioned in my presentation. What the hell is DevOps?
So I'll start with that. To me, DevOps at its core is about ownership and responsibility. In DevOps, there is no them. Excuse me to our friend on the previous panel. There is no throwing it over the wall to the operations team. You build it, you own it. You're the one that gets the call at 3 a.m. because things went sideways and went foobar. And this is important because this drives a cultural change. If I'm not responsible, if I don't own my stuff, I don't care if it goes sideways at 3 in the morning because someone else is cleaning the pieces. I don't feel the pain. I don't feel the pain of an unautomated test suite. I don't feel the pain of an unautomated deploy. Change, human beings respond to two things, pleasure and pain. Okay? And you hit them with pain, behavior changes. And DevOps is about changing behavior. It's primarily cultural. The tools are great. The tools let us do wonderful things. I think about how difficult it was to configure one server when I started off doing this stuff. And I think about now spinning up 1,000 boxes by accident in AWS. And it's incredible what we can do. But again, it's about ownership. It's about responsibility.
I took the wrong seat. I should have been sitting right there and saying, what he said, what he said.
The pain part?
The pain part. You joke, but I'm serious.
We can get back to that.
There's a place around the corner. Anyway, pain is instructional. We run a lot of our meetings and the way that we approach things by mantras. It's a really easy way to remember. And pain is instructional is one of them. You build it, you own it is another. And I like pain is instructional because, as you just pointed out, there's nothing quite as motivating as not getting to sleep through the night. In fact, I was the very first person at my company building the infrastructure, and it had only one design principle from the very beginning. Do not wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not joking. You can't do it on your own when you're building a startup. You're up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're rubbish the next day and the day after. And so from that comes some very wonderful principles like eventual consistency, which is a much nicer way of saying, don't wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I'm with you. It is more about culture and it is more about responsibility. I'd say transparency and communication are the other two really big ones there. It is all about breaking down the us and them. And to kind of leap forward about what I'm sure we will be talking about, it's about aligning incentives. If you tell your development team, I will reward you for shipping features and product, what they're going to do is ship features and product, no matter how bad. Because the whip comes down when they do not ship the feature or do not ship the product. If you tell your operations people, you will do a bad job if the site is down or slow, what they will do is make sure that nothing can possibly change in such a way that makes it slow or go down. And you've just done this on your incentives. And that's how you get us and them. So DevOps for me is getting rid of the us and them and making it align incentives.
Yeah, I want to echo the comment around the pain. Nothing taught me to write better software than waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning, Friday night, being slightly drunk, trying to figure out what the hell just happened to my software. And I've seen it time and times again with the development teams I come to help, where the developers have complete oblivion of what's happening past the point of let's run the CI server and hand it off to operations. I think that when we talk about DevOps, I have another area for me, because we're all software engineers, for us tools are irrelevant or tools are easy, but a lot of this requires tools. The environments are getting more complex, and without the right tool to do that job at 2 a.m. in the morning, I think that's something that we as an industry have been neglecting for a while. I do work for a tools vendor. That may help, but I think you can change the culture. It's difficult. Maybe it's not as difficult for me. I worked for several years on talent management applications, helping folks develop their talent. That's the work you have to do regardless. More often than not, folks tend to forget about the tooling, and that's something I think that also has to evolve. The tooling, much like the culture of us versus them, the tooling has to change from operation tooling and development tooling. I think they need to start coming together. When I was working on IPM, we were talking about things like developer actionable intelligence, right? Giving a developer a vector into the code, not into a server, to help them remove that friction, to foster that type of collaboration. And lastly, I think on the development side of the house, there's a tremendous lack of education on what happens after the point somebody presses the button, right? The development teams, more often than not, even though a lot of them nowadays building online applications or applications that live in the cloud, do not have the relevant background or understanding of what happens. What's the difference between durable storage, ephemeral storage? What's the difference between expensive storage and low-level and cheap storage, right? And therefore, it doesn't get reflected in software designs. And somebody who worked for a SaaS vendor, where margins are a key for us, if you want to run a profitable SaaS business today, you have a gross margin of about 82-84%. All you have to design for that. That just doesn't happen without the developer education.
So I love the consistency in thought here about ownership and accountability. We at Box think about DevOps similarly. For us, it's not about getting code out into production. So for example, what does operations do? Do they just get code out into production? No, there's a lot more to it than just getting code out. We think about DevOps as the entire cycle between build, test, deploy, and operate, and having a really tight feedback loop between how a service performs in production and the developers that are writing the code for that service. And really, the tighter the feedback loop you can get, the better and the more cohesive DevOps model you're operating in. We also think about DevOps as having developers accountable, not just responsible, but accountable for how the service performs in production, which means that if a service is not meeting SLA thresholds, then the way the dev team thinks about their next sprint is very different. So it provides an automatic balance between tech debt and feature work.
I mean, again, it goes back to what are you delivering? And for too long, I think a lot of developers have just assumed that they were delivering a container full of bits, and without thinking about what it was doing, who was using it, how it was being used. It's a much more holistic approach about how you think about it. And it means that everybody really has to have almost a little bit of product manager in them.
If we go back to the previous panel, we're actually doing more of the containerization and abstractions, not less. So I don't want to steal your thunder.
Oh, no. I'm enjoying it. That's what it should be, right? I just stand here and enjoy. And so thank you. And so surprisingly, or maybe not so much, after 5 years talking about DevOps, we have pretty much aligned view of what DevOps is, and this mix of culture change and tooling change. We as engineers afraid more from a cultural change because we think tools are easy, but they are not. And thank you, Leonid, for basically repeating the JFrog platform product pitch about and it wasn't staged. About the products that should fit both development and operations working together. I'm glad to hear that we actually finally have this piece of what is DevOps figured out. And my next question will be, so DevOps is a journey, right, from a cultural perspective and a technical perspective. So how's your journey is? Where did you want it to go, and whether it went that way, and where are you now? It's like a home makeover. You cannot finish, you can just stop, right? So it's an endless journey. And the question is, where are you now in this journey?
So Barak, I don't know where we are specifically, but maybe as I look at the market and teams I've been involved in, I tend to observe about 3 or 4 different stages of maturity as people move along this continuum. And it typically starts with what I would call the fire brigade mode, right? Everybody wakes up at 2 a.m., gets on the swarm call, the blame game begins, who changed what? Those are the first types of questions that get asked in the middle of the night. Oh, it's not my fault, let me go back to bed. And that's where it typically starts, the fire brigade, or what we call the reactive type of operations. As the teams tend to mature, and I think that's where DevOps can help as a culture and as a process, people tend to shift to what I would call reactive improvement, or as I call them, the smoke alarm installers. Right? Those are the folks that will have a problem that will hit them once in production, they'll make sure it will never happen again. Typically, you'll see things like continuous instrumentation evolve, right? A closer feedback loop between the development team and the operations team. And I think the ultimate pinnacle for me in that maturity curve is what I call continuous improvement, or we call them the Smokey the Bear, right? The fire prevention brigade. And only if you went through the first couple stages and you have the relevant skills, and we haven't talked about the skills when it comes to DevOps, or the relevant tools, you can get to that top level. What we do see on the side, when we studied the market last time, I was part of a research study. We found what we call the volunteer fire departments that emerge kind of organically at the bottom, right, where the developments and collaboration say, well, it doesn't work anymore. The company is not supporting, so the collaboration happens at the volunteer fire department level. But that also requires skills, and that's something I wanted to add to the previous question we haven't touched about. The skills of the teams have to change. I touched on the development side, but I haven't touched on the operations side. Every single operations teams I worked with had to evolve their skill sets to be more robot-friendly, more automation-friendly. You see software engineering types joining the operations team, which wasn't and typically not found in companies that are not moving on that journey.
So I think one of the things I think happens in the journey, and I've seen again and again, is the development, the growth of development skills, software development skills across the organization. And I mean literally across the organization. So yes, you have it in the core software development team, but you need to see it in QA. Testing needs to become and viewed as a software development discipline.
Yes.
Okay. And you see that in a few very mature organizations, but I don't think you see it broadly enough. Okay. And you want that creativity unleashed in writing really, really nasty software that's attacking your software. You need to see that in operations, as you said. But you even need to see it in your product owners, where they start doing things like defining features with cucumber scripts, so that you start getting it in code. The end of the goal of this is everything's in code, everything's version controlled. You can see it there, it can be tested, it can be attacked, it can be reviewed.
Definitely
Agree with that.
Oh, go ahead.
So, in operations, we're seeing this change gradually over many years, where we're now hiring developers in operations, right? And as we think about the world we operate in with infrastructure as a service, whether it's the private cloud, the public cloud, platform as a service being developed where we can deploy assemblies and so on, what you need in operations is developers, and that skill set has to evolve. In terms of our journey, not too long ago, we were 3 very distinct groups. We had a network operations center, a NOC, a first responder that would get alerts and that would do some runbooks. We had an operations team responsible for site reliability and dev team. Not too long ago, this is like 2 years ago, every week we'd get thousands of alerts, thousands. There would be thousands of pages out to the NOC team. They would be desensitized to it. They would not take action. We were at risk. We were at risk because there wasn't this tight feedback loop. And what we did was we had to get the developers as the first responders to alerts. That is the thing that we started with. Once we started that, and then we started taking a look at what are the kind of alerts that these teams are getting, and why is their productivity diving because they're responding to these alerts. It started that flywheel of getting the right alerts fixed, the noisiest alerts fixed, and improving site stability overall. So
I think I would echo, of course, everybody's. I think we're having a mostly agreed on panel here. So
I'll have to do something there.
Yeah, exactly.
One of us will have to.
It's my fault.
Down with robots. But beyond all this, one of the core skills that we see for our DevOps practice is to bring infrastructure knowledge and architecture knowledge to the development teams as well. There are best practices, there are components. And I'll go back to, and thank you, Chad, for bringing up Lego earlier. I'm a big Lego nerd. And Lego, adults who play with Lego or build with Lego, they have lots of acronyms for all the things. And one of the most despised piece has the acronym POOP, P-O-O-P. It's a part of other parts. In other words, you have a part that you can make out of other parts, but they give you a big lumpy thing of plastic and you're supposed to deal with it. Nobody likes it. You can't really build with it very well. It's not very reusable. Back to the DevOps practice, we found monoliths or other hoops like that were kind of built in the infrastructure and you couldn't integrate them with other parts. So one of the big skills that we bring as the DevOps practice and operations practice is to build them or to take them apart again into the little smaller components and make sure that they're better integrated. And then back to the microservices conversation we had earlier, you can understand that better, you can use that better, you can control the costs better, the SLA, and educate people. You have one true way of doing it with that little component rather than having lots of poop in your infrastructure.
Well, maybe it's time to inject some controversy here. On microservices, and specifically when it comes to DevOps practice, I think we as an industry at times have this fascination with fads and fashionable things. And I attended a Riley's architecture conference about a year ago. Probably the most memorable slide from that conference was, if you cannot build a structured monolith, what makes you think you're going to be successful with microservices? That was the question that the presenter posed. And I couldn't agree with him. I think a lot of folks, and I think something you alluded to, the level of discipline and level of understanding of what happens is evolving with both DevOps and microservices because the safety nets are being removed. Like the safety net of, well, 6 months from now, we're going to test the release and regress it and performance test it in the lab and be happy about it is going away. And what I've seen time and time again is folks jump on the microservices bandwagon without realizing the underlying infrastructure, the culture, and the tooling that has to be there in order for them to be successful. And that's not the first fad that came to this industry and was embraced. SOA was like that back in the day. And the question becomes, what we as practitioners could do is introducing the culture to make sure that we don't get burned by that.
So I think building off of that, I think one of the things that I've seen that I think is critical to where we're going as an industry, whether we call it DevOps, we call it architecture, whatever, is the need for more generalists, people who understand architecture, who understand how pieces fit together and how you can build something from them. Our interviews are very focused on getting people who go really, really deep in some area, but we don't talk about broad. And so like in my interviews, I've actually gotten to moving to much more broad and also real world interview questions. I don't ask them to do a binary tree. They can fucking look it up in Canute, okay? They can, okay? If they need to, they Google it. They might spend some time figuring it out, but that's fine. But the ability to actually say, how are you going to put these pieces together? How are you going to make them work? The thing is, this is something new, but it's also old. Does anybody remember the Unix programming model? Small tools that do things well, that you string together. That's microservices. It is. Let's be honest. That's it. That's what it is.
It's also Lego, by the way.
It's also Legos. Yes, exactly. And I played with Legos as a kid. So
we've actually been on a journey to split up our huge PHP monolith into smaller services, the service decomposition journey.
We get back to the microservices panel again, right? Okay, then go on. I like it.
How it relates to this is we've actually found it a lot harder to do DevOps with a monolith. When you have 70 developers contributing to code, it's really hard to page one of them in the night when something goes wrong. It's a lot easier to implement when you have a small team of developers responsible for doing one thing and doing it well.
So then don't page one specific guy, put the team on call, and look how quickly they will sort it out amongst themselves.
Yeah.
That gets partitioned real quick if it needs to. Pain is instructional, right?
Pain is absolutely instructional.
So to hook into the cultural change, actually cultural change is hard, and trying to facilitate cultural change is even harder. And if you have an agenda in that cultural change, it's even harder still. So what we try to do instead is make the right thing the easy thing to do. It turns out that the best developers you hire are incredibly lazy.
Yes.
So if you give them an easy way to do things or a hard way to do things, they'll do the easy thing. They're very creative. I'll admit something here. It'll both show my age and maybe some. So my first programming language was Perl, and one of the 3 tenets of that one is, there you go. No,
Pascal.
okay, not half of it. That's
real
generation gap right there.
Right. That's all right.
So one of the 3 tenets is of a good Perl programmer is laziness.
Yes.
If you write too much code and so on, laziness is a good thing. And I've carried that with me all the time. If you have to do something again and again and again, it's a terrible thing. And so if you ask a developer or an operation, doesn't matter, any engineer, what would you like to do? Would you like to spend lots of time figuring it out and then be on the hook for it and miss your deadlines and work late? Or do you want to do the easy thing that I promise will totally work? They'll pick this one, hands one down. So the only thing you have to do is make sure that the easy thing is the right thing. There's your free cultural change.
And the thing that I would observe, cultural change, the velocity of cultural change is driven by both pain and pleasure. So can you see something really good at the end of the tunnel because of this change? And is there something pushing you along as you go? As I mentioned at the beginning, I have moved, live, and work in Singapore now. So I've been actually reading a lot of history to learn about my new country and what's going on there. And what's very interesting is how much pain, the pain of where Singapore was in 1965, 1963, drove incredible cultural change and incredible growth in that country. And it's very instructive. And I think, again and again, you'll find places in history and in organizations where there was this confluence of pain and opportunity, i.e. the pleasure, that drove that cultural change. People need to see those 2 pieces. And if they see that, and if they see a way to do it easily, i.e. automation, tooling, things like that, then it's going to happen. And if it's fun, too, Legos.
Okay, so I guess I know how we will make this agreement and, joyful getting together to stop. Questions that you are not prepared to. So, guys, I think we have a couple of more minutes for your questions. Maybe we'll have time for 1 or 2. Go ahead. Oh, come on. Here we go.
Actually, to the term DevOps in one word. No, we don't that word.
It's bullshit. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's like saying, what is your response to no DBMS? I mean, you need experts in areas that understand things. There will always be the person who has a strength in infrastructure, in the systems integration, in operational thinking on that team. But they should be a developer along with everybody else.
No good words. I would counter the question with a question: what happened when you tried? And I think if we look at what happened when they tried, and we all know who we're talking about here, they came back from that position.
I'd coin a new term: no dev. That's because there aren't development teams and there aren't operations teams. There are engineering teams. So the way we are organizationally structured is we have one engineering team. Yes, there are experts at operations and there are experts at software development, but they're all part of one team.
Actually, I'd change that. We have product teams who deliver products to our customers.
Because ultimately, that's
ultimately what it's about. How we get there. If little elves deliver it in the middle of the night, that's fine. But the product team had to get it there.
And it's an interesting thing. Like, if you ask people, what do you do? A lot of them, I write code or I ship features. Now, what you do is you build customer satisfaction. That's what you really do. And if there's a disconnect there, then it'll break down.
Which is interesting because one team we haven't talked in all of this when you talk about product development is the product management team. Right? For those of us who work at companies with fully fledged kind of professional product management teams, the way they evolve and the way they are ready to prioritize the type of work that you need to do to successfully deliver continuous delivery, DevOps models, is that pain, but their pain gets typically inflicted by customers, and it is our jobs to go and translate that pain into something they can understand. And I've seen time and time again product management teams that I collaborated with evolve and being very, very proactive in proactively investing in things like SLAs, non-functional requirements that allow the continuous delivery, that allow the DevOps. but it is upon us to go to translate it into some kind of business value, which not all of us do as well as we should yet.
This is where the generalist becomes more and more important.
Yes.
It's a really powerful point, by the way, and I encourage all my engineers is when they come outside of their org to explain any type of problem or solution or whatnot, if you cannot express it in business terms, turn this dial, cost more of this, get more of that, you're not done with the problem. Don't show up and say like, oh, we just need to switch this database system for that database system or more storage over here. You're not yet done. It's a business question, not a technical one.
Are you taking young developers, engineers? Are you having them talk to customers? Are you teaching them how to understand financials so they understand the impact of that 1% change in costs in AWS on whether this company is profitable or not? Are you helping them understand legal so that they understand why they need to be careful about things? I actually have a nice reading list that I give to new developers that covers things in products, covers things in finance, it covers things in legal.
Which you will share at the end of this talk with everybody.
I will send it out, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so it didn't work. You still all agree. And I would love to challenge you more, but unfortunately we're out of time. So thank you very much.
You.
Oh, we have. Oh, okay. Let's try it again.
You got dispensation?
Are you taking back the applause? Is that what you said?
I think it depends, and I went through a variety of evolutions of the dark. At Taleo, we were running a startup within a larger company. We were fairly independent, and I run operations and engineering, and once we reached about 3,000-4,000 customers, it was time to go and bifurcate the organization, because at some point you achieve economy of scales. What I've seen personally is getting the cultural aspects right early helps if the organizations kind of sit very tightly integrated nearby, right? So operations and engineering software engineering teams were rolling up to me, and the disagreements or the conflicts of interest, especially when it came to culture switch, got resolved very quickly. If you don't do that, and we've seen that when Taleo got acquired by Oracle, we took our operations team and kind of transplanted into the broader Oracle's larger operations team. Again, at scale, it does make sense. And we continued with that culture because the DNA existed. But getting that DNA when the only place those two teams connect is somewhere near the CEO is much more difficult. You need a completely different set of individuals to get done. The other thing I've seen that work extremely well on the software engineer team, while paying is extremely instructional, interruptions are extremely disruptive to developers. So what I typically tend to do as the team matures, you go beyond 15, 20 engineers, I will carve out what I call customer success engineering team. It's one or two guys that typically, their job is to be interrupted that nobody else does. And I've been fortunate enough to find software engineers who don't like the long-term kind of deep thinking processes. They're more firefighters by nature. And putting a team like that in place had allowed me to still inflict enough pain on the development team to make sure they learn their lessons, but not to completely disrupt their day-to-day living so they can't get anything long-term done.
We've done exactly the same thing at Box. We've got a customer success engineering team. We call them SWAT. They're part of the engineering team, which is the combined dev and ops team. But that customer success engineering team gets their priorities from customer success.
So I would do a little bit. I think the key thing here is removing the barriers between the customer and the development team. I also think that it's great to build that formal team. I think you want to rotate people through that also.
We do. So, that's something I haven't mentioned.
So it's the equivalent of putting people on the phones and having them listen to the phones. And so it's like, hey, every third sprint, you're out there, or every fourth sprint, you got rotated in.
Yep.
I mean, you want to have the continuity. You don't want things being just handed off willy-nilly. So you want a core there, but rotate people through.
We actually have a voluntary rotation, and you'd be surprised at how eager people are to get into that rotation.
And find people who, for that SWAT team, that have ADHD. That's who you want.
Back to aligned incentives. That's what it all comes about. So when you ask your ops teams or your dev teams, even if you call them ops and dev teams, you already broke the mold, right? They're an engineering team, as everybody here on the panel is saying. But even within that, we try to align incentives as much as possible. So within my org, we have 3 separate teams, and one of them, we call them the embedded platform engineering team, and they are exactly that. They work with developers. They take their cues from developer. Their only focus, ship product. Help them ship product. Whatever you need to do, that's the right thing. But you're on the hook for SLAs and costs and scaling and uptime and all these different things. And we do the rotation so everybody understands all the different bits, but it gets past the interruptions. It gets past of I have 2 different things that I have to do. I have to think long-term and stability over here for the thing on the horizon, and I have to do the firefighting, but I also have to ship product. one or two of these things always lose out. So that's how we do it. We split the focus, but with the same talent set.
So I think we have time for 2 more questions, either from the audience or the moderator.
Wow. One comment on this thing. So in my last job at Yahoo, I was responsible for driving the largest Chef deployment in the world. So we deployed Chef across every node at Yahoo. And one of the things we had to do was drive this throughout 350 different orgs. So Yahoo is really just a bunch of little companies within one big monolith that's disintegrating right now. Please don't broadcast that.
So micro companies.
Yeah, micro companies.
Okay.
And so it was very interesting to see how different teams responded to this. The teams that did the best in the transition were the teams that really viewed themselves as product teams. Those that were very strong about, well, we're an engineering team in the sense of we just write code rather than we're delivering value to customers. It was the most difficult for them to make that transition.
One thing that I've done in the past to mitigate some of this, at least during the transition, just look for talent that has been on the other side of the equation and can earn the trust of the other team by understanding what they go through. Whether it's the ops guys that have development background or whether it's engineers that have been on the ops side of the house. Because ultimately, the cultural shift that and the word we haven't used today is all about trust.
Yes.
I said that first thing, thanks. Yeah, you can't rewrite history, man. We're being recorded.
That has not been my observation. In fact, some of the biggest changes, the improvements have come from the more tenured guys who have more experience and come up with durable solutions. So no, that hasn't been my experience.
I think there are people who are stuck and they want to do it the way they always did it. I'll see whatever you are and raise it to 52. That's how old I am. And for me, the range of experience I have gives me perspective. So let me see it from the other side, where other people are at, which lets me also drag things out that people haven't thought about in 20 years and go, well, that's kind of like
It's all about pattern recognition,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And
and so I think one of the things, and I think one of the things that the Valley is completely undervaluing is experience. What's really interesting for me, I was at Uyala, video startup. Sean Knapp was the CTO there. And it's interesting, Sean has just started a new company, Ascend.io, which is doing some really cool things. And I went to visit him, and I met the first 3 hires he made, and they all looked like me. Whereas when I came into Uyala, the joke was that I doubled the average age in the company. Okay. And so it's interesting that Sean, in literally 8 years, made that transition from, well, the people who could just churn code out really, really fast to experience and pattern recognition and what that's valued. And so I think if you're a CTO, if you're a VC, you need to start pushing your company to say, where are the experienced people? Where are the people who've been there, done that, and experienced that?
We are not doomed yet. That's good.
I hope not.
Yeah, I have a question. Here, microservices, right?
I heard about it earlier, yeah.
Yeah, something, yeah. What's that
I'm
thing?
worried about it. Are you just saying, hey, we have a culture all set up?
So are we worried about microservices? Will our devs just throw stuff over the walls? Well, they're not devs, they're engineers, and we're all in this together. That's one of the things we managed to establish early with the culture, and it makes all the difference. And again, we tried really hard to make the right thing the easy thing. So even though containers might look good or microservices look good, we have established patterns that are easier and easier to integrate. So if you say, follow this pattern, and by that it's like standard libraries in the language that we use, that's what everything's built on top of. That means there's monitoring in there. That means that there's metrics in there. It means there's cost tagging in there. So you get all that stuff for free. So if you show up with, I want to deploy this container, we're not going to say, no, like, that's great, but you kind of have to make it this tall to enter. So where is the standard container format that we will then use? How do you instrument that? How do you do this? How do you do that? And if there is enough impetus to want to do that, you'll see that come up. It's like, but this is so much better. I will put in the work. We will put in the work to prove to you that it works. Great. Then we have a new tool in the toolkit. We will embrace it hands down. But it's not just because it's nicer on my laptop. That is not a sufficient reason.
So as long as standards are followed for these microservices, you get a ton of things for free. You get SLA measurement, you get monitoring, all of those things because of those libraries that are dropped in, right? So having those standards available is key. Microservices is not a license to implement things in any way you want, right? What we do is a little bit of an extension of you build it, you run it, or you build it, you own it. You deploy it, you own it. So even if you use somebody else's libraries and you deploy it, you as a developer are responsible for owning it and maintaining it in production.
So one of the companies I'm working with in Singapore is a company called Wobe, which is a fintech startup that's targeting people at the bottom of the pyramid within Southeast Asia who live in what we call the prepaid economy. And I went in there and I said, listen, the right way to do this is a microservice architecture, but we laid out principles for doing that. If you read kind of the first thing people read, it's our development philosophy, and it has 8 points in it, which we've basically touched on 80% of them here, okay? I think it's important that people be on the same page and that you make that easy to be by communicating, ruthless communication, but also by building that into your tools, building into your code, those things, which I think people here are touching on. Tools do not make a culture, but they can reinforce a culture. They can guide a culture. They can make it the path of least resistance. If doing the right thing is the easy thing, people will do the right thing. And that's why I advised them, and they spent, basically before they started cracking code, they spent 2 months building tooling before they wrote a line of what would be the product code. And they got those things right. And then they were able to move and quickly deliver features, and basically are going to be shipping a product in 8 weeks. But it was 2 weeks. It was 8 weeks before that to deliver 8 weeks of product.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists and to Baruch.
Let me just say that I find your joy in putting your engineers to pain very, very disturbing.
It's clearly the industry standard right there.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much. And a special note of thanks again to Jordan for making the not insignificant commute from Singapore to San Francisco for a day and a half to come.
His watch is still set to 3:03 a.m. So he's gonna
This is a problem with Garmin. It's supposed to auto change.